Okay, continuing with Marx's critique of capitalism, we've talked in the last video about his ethical critique of capitalism, which, as I've beaten to death, hangs on the labor theory of value. The second critique of capitalism I was calling, or we were calling, whatever, the spiritual critique of capitalism. And there's something really powerful here. In Marx's understanding of the human spirit or the human essence, or what he calls the Gattungswesen, the species being or the nature of human beings. And he thinks that the nature of human beings is, somewhere he writes, where the animal laborans, or where the laboring animal, that is, we find meaning. We find meaning in our labor. We find meaning in our labor, in our productivity. And Viktor Frankl, for example, recently wrote a book, last 50 or 60 years, whatever it is, Man's Search for Meaning, where he argues, based on a Nietzsche quote, if human beings have a why, they can endure any how. That is, we're creatures of meaning. We seek meaning. And if you think about the way we divide our day, there's 24 hours in a day. You're sleeping 8 hours, you're working 8 hours, and then you're doing whatever else at 8 hours. But for a third of the day, actually half, because you're sleeping 8 hours, so you have 16 hours, 8 of those hours you're working. And human beings need to find value and meaning in their work, okay? And one of the things Marx argues is that capitalism thwarts, that is, hinders our ability to find meaning in our work and labor. Now, why does he say that? Well, it has to do with his understanding of, as we said before, human nature, the Gattungswesen, our human spirit, our human essence. And he thinks of it this way, and he takes this from a philosopher called Hegel, who says that the spirit of the human being is dialectical. That means it's back and forth, dialectical. That is, our human nature is to project ourselves onto things and then return to ourselves. So the self goes out from itself and then comes back to itself. That is, we recognize ourselves in things that are other than ourselves in order to know ourselves, in order to become ourselves. So we see ourselves in other people, in objects, etc. So think of the child who paints a picture at school and goes, look, mommy, look what I did, hanging on the refrigerator, very proud, and they see themselves in their work. Or think of friendship as you seeing yourself, self-recognition and otherness, okay? Marx thinks that happens in our relationships with other people and our relationship with things that we're laboring. So the human spirit has this need, this craving to see meaning, to find ourselves in our work, to see ourselves in our work, okay? To find our work meaningful, to enjoy our jobs, to enjoy our lives. No doubt when you were picking a major in school, you probably made this calculation, all right, what can I do where I make enough money that I enjoy myself and that I don't hate my life, doing this over and over again for the rest of my life, basically. And it's a calculation we all sort of make. And Marx argues that capitalism, insofar as it divides labor, okay? Now think about this. It has to divide labor. Like think of somebody on the assembly line who's just hammering over and over again the same nail into the shoe, whatever. As we divide labor more and more, it becomes more efficient. So you can't, if you open a shoe store, for example, let's stick with that, and you have every single person that, let's say I hire 50 people, I'm opening a shoe store, and I hire 50 people and they're all making shoes. Well, if I have every single individual person make a shoe, that's not very efficient. But if I divide the labor into one person makes this, one person makes that, you can become very, very efficient. And Marx says this, capitalism is very efficient. However, in dividing labor up like that, in the division of labor, as labor becomes more efficient, it becomes more divided. And when it becomes more divided, if I'm just sitting there hammering a nail into whatever, or working in some department of a store that I can't even see how the whole thing works, I'm going to find my labor absolutely meaningless. And Marx gives a term for this. He calls it alienation. Alienation. Alienation is when I'm alienated from my own spirit. Myself cannot recognize itself in what's other than itself, namely its labor. I find alienation is when I find my work meaningless. There's a kind of nihilism or meaninglessness to the labor of capitalism, when the labor is divided, when I'm on the assembly line, when I'm working a job I don't really care about. And what's Marx's problem with this? Well, he thinks the human spirit is a spirit that needs to care about its labor. It needs to find meaning in its labor, okay? So just think about some symptoms, for example, of alienation, or some evidence of alienation, the way people talk about their work week. TGIF, I don't know if they say that, but there's a restaurant based on it. Thank God it's Friday. We call Wednesday hump day. Think of the way the alcoholic consumption is divided among college students on, used to be Wine Wednesday and Thirsty Thursday. I don't know what it is on Monday, but whatever. We look forward to the weekend where we can anesthetize ourselves even, and alcoholism becomes prevalent. Why? Because we're so stressed by the meaninglessness of our job, okay? So Marx is arguing that crucial to our own psychology is that we have some stake in what we make. Crucial to our own psychology is that we have some investment, emotional investment. We find some meaning in what we make. So making and laboring are part of the nature of the human being, part of our essence. We like to recognize ourselves in our products. We like to create things. We like to express ourselves. Self-expression is very important. And Marx thinks that when we divide labor, which necessarily happens in order to make it more efficient and more productive, we lose something and we become alienated. I find this to be the most convincing part of Marxism. Now the question is it capitalism that does this? If you recall the biblical story in Genesis 3 after the fall of human beings, one of the curses is, women have pain in childbirth, and the man, or well, we could say humans at this point, has to toil and sweat for their labor, and they will make their living by the sweat of their brow or whatever it is. There's almost as if it's built into the curse or in nature. At least the biblical author of Genesis was familiar with this idea of not liking to work. Right? We hate working. Why? I mean, I don't know. Maybe taking this class is very alienating from you. Why? Because you can't find it meaningful. So we need to find meaning in things, and Marx thinks that capitalism thwarts our ability to find meaning in things. Now the question is that, again, societal, cultural, or is it in nature? Okay. So we've talked about his ethical critique of capitalism, labor theory of value, and then the spiritual critique of capitalism, which is based on his idea of alienation, or the alienation of the human being from its labor.